It began like any other Tuesday morning in March. The sun rose over the Atlantic Ocean, casting its familiar gold across the waves. People hurried to work. Students crossed streets with backpacks slung over their shoulders. It was one of those mornings where humanity moved on autopilot, billions of people, billions of small lives, each one unaware that within the hour, everything would change forever. And somewhere far out at sea, aboard the USS Guardian, Commander Jake Morrison was finishing his third cup of coffee. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to witness the single most important event in human history, the day Earth met the unknown. The alarm hit without warning. Every console in the command center erupted in red light. Screens flashed data faster than anyone could read. The sound, that relentless beeping, filled the air like a heartbeat gone mad. Jake almost dropped his mug. His first instinct wasn't fear, it was disbelief. System malfunction, he thought. It had to be. The Atlantic was calm, radar was clear just moments ago. But then Dr. Lisa Hamilton, the ship's lead physicist, spoke. Her voice trembled. "Commander, something just appeared above the ocean." Jake turned to her, and for a moment, everything in the room seemed to go quiet, even the alarms. Lisa stared at her screen, pale and wide-eyed, as if she couldn't trust what her instruments were telling her. "It's massive," she whispered. "Bigger than anything we've ever recorded. And it's not from this Earth." Jake crossed the room in 3 strides. He leaned over her shoulder, and when he saw the data, his pulse skipped. On the radar, something enormous was hovering just beyond the horizon. A shape stretching for miles, its surface shifting in impossible patterns, flickering between metallic reflections and liquid textures, like reality itself couldn't decide what it was. He had seen stealth bombers, experimental aircraft, even classified orbital platforms, but this wasn't human. Within minutes, the Guardian's communications erupted with calls from other naval stations. Every radar on the eastern seaboard had picked up the same anomaly. What had appeared above the Atlantic was now visible from space, a structure so vast it cast a shadow over the clouds beneath it. At the Pentagon, generals demanded answers. At the United Nations, emergency meetings were called. And in Washington, President Margaret Cole was rushed from her bed to the Situation Room, where satellite feeds displayed the impossible. A colossal vessel, silent, motionless, and utterly alien, hovering above the Atlantic Ocean. The first question she asked was the only one that mattered. "Is it hostile?" No one could answer. The object wasn't emitting weapon signatures, radiation, or any known propulsion signal. It was simply there. Floating. Defying gravity. Defying everything humanity thought it understood about physics. Across the globe, militaries scrambled. Jets took off. Missiles were armed, but no one dared to fire. The world was caught in collective paralysis, staring up at the sky and realizing that for the first time, humanity was no longer alone. On the USS Guardian, Jake Morrison ordered his team to attempt communication. Every frequency. Every code. Radio waves, laser pulses, even Morse code, desperate attempts to say "we see you." No reply. Dr. Hamilton ran every scan she could think of. Her readings came back distorted, as if the object itself was rewriting the rules her instruments depended on. The energy patterns were impossible. The material composition, unrecognizable. It contained elements that shouldn't exist together, at least, not in this universe as humans understood it. "It's not built," she said softly, staring at the data. "It's grown." Jake didn't know what to say. He only knew one thing: whatever this was, it wasn't a coincidence. Within the first hour, the story broke worldwide. News networks scrambled to cover it. Smartphones captured images of the vessel, glowing, immense, and strangely beautiful, from cities along the coast. And as social media erupted, so did humanity's imagination. Some called it first contact. Others whispered apocalypse. Religious leaders invoked prophecy. Scientists demanded calm. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was a government experiment gone wrong. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. This wasn't a test. This was a threshold, one humanity had feared and dreamed of for centuries. Traffic stopped in every major city as people stepped out of their cars to stare up at the sky. The air felt heavier somehow, not from the vessel itself, but from the weight of realization pressing down on billions of minds at once. Was this the end of the world, or the beginning of something greater? By nightfall, the vessel hadn't moved. It didn't threaten or communicate. It simply hovered there, silent, patient, like a presence waiting for something. Jake stayed on the command deck long after most of the crew had gone to rest. He stared through the viewing window at the distant glow above the clouds and felt, for the first time in his life, the vastness of what humanity didn't know. Lisa joined him quietly. "What if it's not here to invade?" she asked. "What if it's just watching us?" Jake didn't answer. Because deep down, he suspected she might be right. On the second day, the world changed again. Not through war. Not through destruction. But through a voice. It didn't come through any radio, satellite, or device. It came directly into every mind on Earth, billions of people hearing the same message in their own languages, at the exact same moment. Jake was in his quarters when it happened. One instant he was alone, the next, a presence filled his thoughts, vast, calm, and ancient. The words echoed without sound. "We have come to witness." 4 words. That was all. But those 4 words carried more weight than any declaration in human history. A fisherman in Norway heard them in Norwegian. A child in Cairo heard them in Arabic. A scientist in Mumbai heard them in Hindi. And yet, every single one understood the same meaning. It wasn't a voice of conquest or salvation. It was something deeper. Something older. A consciousness that had crossed unimaginable distances, not to rule humanity, but to observe it. Jake ran to the command center. Every crew member looked shaken, pale, and yet connected by the shared experience. They all knew what they had heard. And for the first time since the vessel appeared, Jake wasn't afraid. He was awed. Because the moment had come, the moment every philosopher, scientist, and dreamer had imagined but never truly believed would happen. Humanity's first contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. Across the world, governments panicked and debated. Should they respond? Should they attack? Should they surrender? But the most brilliant minds on Earth quickly agreed on one thing: any species capable of speaking into the minds of every human being was far beyond humanity's power to resist. Violence would be meaningless. Instead, humanity had one option: to listen. And so, a delegation was formed, scientists, diplomats, and soldiers chosen to represent Earth in its first meeting with another intelligence. As the team prepared, the world held its breath. For the first time in history, the human race wasn't just watching the stars. The stars were watching back. If you were alive that day, standing beneath a sky that no longer belonged to just us, what would you have felt? Fear? Wonder? Hope? Tell me in the comments. Because this is how humanity's awakening began. And in part 2, we'll follow the team that dared to meet the architects, the beings who came not to conquer, but to remind us that every civilization, at some point, must choose what kind of species it wants to become. For 3 days, the sky remained unchanged. The vessel hovered silently above the Atlantic, unmoving, unyielding, a mountain of metal and light that defied comprehension. Every hour, the world waited for another message. But the voice never returned. No demands. No threats. Just silence. And yet, that silence was louder than any war. In Washington, the emergency session of the United Nations stretched into its 3rd night. Delegates from every nation sat in the great chamber, faces pale under the harsh lights. They weren't arguing over politics or borders anymore. Those concepts had dissolved. For the first time, humanity spoke as one species. A representative from Japan called the moment the Great Pause. A poet from Kenya called it the day Earth held its breath. But Commander Jake Morrison had a simpler word for it. He called it waiting. He was one of 12 chosen to represent humanity, a team of scientists, linguists, and military officers assembled aboard the USS Guardian to make first contact with the beings inside the vessel. They didn't know what to expect. They didn't even know if they were expected. On the morning of the fourth day, the ocean stirred. The water beneath the vessel began to rise, not boiling, not churning, but lifting, as though gravity itself were being rewritten. Jake stood on deck, the wind tearing at his uniform, as an enormous sphere descended from the heart of the alien ship. It moved with slow, deliberate grace, glowing faintly with the same impossible geometry that had baffled every physicist on Earth. The sphere hovered just above the waterline. Then, from within it, a single beam of light reached out, scanning across the deck, pausing on Jake, and stopping. A voice, clear and calm, filled the air once again. "We are the architects. Step forward." The world watched in silence. Every camera, every satellite, every pair of human eyes followed Jake Morrison as he crossed the deck and stepped into the light. The moment his hand touched the beam, the world around him vanished. He wasn't on the ship anymore. He was standing inside something that defied explanation, a vast hall of shifting light and structure, endlessly reconfiguring like it was alive. He couldn't tell if it was metal or energy or both. And then he saw them. Figures of radiant design, tall and translucent, moving with impossible stillness. They had no faces, no mouths, no eyes, but Jake could feel their attention, sharp and ancient, fixed entirely on him. Their thoughts brushed against his like whispers in a dream. "You are the voice of your kind. You stand at the threshold of understanding." Jake tried to speak, but his voice was gone. The words formed only in thought. "Why are you here?" The answer came not as sound, but as feeling, deep, resonant, echoing inside his chest. "To measure the sum of your becoming." Across the world, the Guardian's crew watched in disbelief as Jake's body vanished into the beam. Sensors couldn't detect him. Communication failed. All they could do was wait, again. Inside the sphere, time moved differently. Jake wasn't sure if he'd been there for minutes or hours. The architects showed him visions, not of stars or battles, but of Earth itself. Oceans boiling. Forests dying. Cities rising and falling across millennia. Human history replayed like a film made for their judgment. He saw moments of beauty, the first fire, the first song, a child reaching for a star. And moments of horror, the wars, the greed, the cruelty. When it ended, one of the beings stepped closer. Its voice was both gentle and unyielding. "You have reached awareness. But awareness is not wisdom." Jake's thoughts trembled. "Are you here to destroy us?" "Destruction is irrelevant. You will destroy yourselves if you fail the test." He hesitated. "What test?" For the first time, the architect's forms dimmed, as if remembering something painful. Every civilization that awakens must face the choice. To ascend beyond the hunger of power, or to vanish into the silence of its own making. Jake didn't understand. "Ascend how? What do you want from us?" "We want nothing. We only witness. Your choices decide your fate." The hall darkened. The beings began to fade. Before they vanished completely, the voice returned, softer, almost mournful. "Do not look to the stars for gods. They look to you." And then, Jake was back on the deck of the Guardian, gasping for air as if he had been underwater. Doctors rushed to him. His pulse was normal. His vitals were fine. But his eyes were different. He looked at Lisa Hamilton and whispered, "They weren't here to invade. They were here to judge. That night, Jake gave his report to the United Nations via live transmission. Every nation listened. Every home tuned in. He described what he had seen, the visions, the test, the words of the architects. Some called it enlightenment. Others called it manipulation. World leaders argued endlessly. Some saw opportunity, an interstellar alliance, technology, immortality. Others saw a threat, a cosmic ultimatum. But the ordinary people of Earth saw something else entirely. Hope. For the first time, humanity wasn't divided by fear, but united by wonder. If the architects were right, if every civilization faced this test, then maybe humanity still had a chance to pass it. In the days that followed, the architect's vessel began to change. It fractured into hundreds of luminous shards that rose silently into orbit, forming a perfect ring around the Earth. No one understood their purpose. They emitted no energy, no signal. They simply hung there, like a halo. Scientists called them sentinels. The public called them watchers. Jake called them reminders. Because deep down, he knew what they meant. Humanity was being watched, not by conquerors or saviors, but by witnesses. The test had already begun. And far beyond the solar system, in the cold darkness between galaxies, something else stirred. A ripple through the void. A signal older than light itself, faint, patient, and waiting. The architects had not been the first to find humanity. They had only been the messengers. So what would you have done, standing before beings older than stars, hearing that your species was being judged not by strength, but by its ability to change? Would you be proud of what we've become? Or afraid of what they might see next? In Part 3, we'll follow what happens when humanity finally learns the truth behind the architects, and the ancient intelligence waiting beyond them, known only as the Harari. It had been 6 months since the architects appeared above the Atlantic. 6 months since they left their ring of silent watchers orbiting Earth, neither hostile nor benevolent, simply observing. And in those 6 months, humanity changed. Borders softened. Nations collaborated. For the first time in recorded history, global military budgets dropped, redirected toward science and exploration. The question had shifted from who owns the world to who truly understands it. Yet beneath that fragile unity, a quiet unease remained. If the architects were only witnesses, then who were they witnessing for? Commander Jake Morrison had been grounded since the event, classified, debriefed, dissected by every intelligence agency on Earth. But one night, 6 months after first contact, he was called back to the Atlantic Command Center. Dr. Lisa Hamilton was waiting there, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. "Jake," she said, "they're moving." On the screen behind her, the orbital ring, the 100 shards the architects had left, was shifting. Slowly, deliberately, the objects began aligning into new formations, forming intricate geometric patterns across the sky. But it wasn't random. They were transmitting. The message wasn't directed toward Earth. It was being sent outward, far beyond the solar system. Someone, or something, was listening. The world's observatories came alive that night. Every radio telescope from Arecibo to the Atacama Array focused on the signal. It wasn't human. And it wasn't from the architects. The patterns were older, vastly older. They resonated on frequencies no known civilization could have used without tearing itself apart. Dr. Hamilton spent hours decoding fragments. The transmission contained symbols, fractal equations describing not physics, but memory. It was like listening to the echoes of a mind spread across time. And within those echoes was a name repeated endlessly in alien syntax. Harari. When the transmission stopped, the ring went dark. Every shard dimmed to black, their perfect symmetry broken. And then, from beyond the orbit of Neptune, something answered. It began as a whisper in the cosmic background, a low-frequency pulse, steady, deliberate, and growing stronger by the hour. It wasn't light. It wasn't radio. It was something else. Lisa described it best. It's not a message, she said. It's a presence. 2 weeks later, telescopes picked up a disturbance at the edge of the solar system. Something vast was entering from interstellar space, a structure so large it dwarfed planets. Unlike the architect's vessel, this one wasn't elegant or silent. It was fractured, ancient, covered in scars that spoke of unthinkable wars. And wherever it passed, the stars behind it dimmed, as if light itself bent away from its shape. Panic returned. The fragile unity humanity had built began to crack under fear. Governments fell back into secrecy. Militaries rearmed. The old reflexes of survival re-emerged, faster than hope could suppress them. Jake was called again to lead the Guardian. His orders were simple: approach the incoming structure, establish communication, and, if possible, determine its intent. He didn't believe it was a coincidence. The architects had left their warning. And now, the reason for that warning was coming. As the Guardian neared the outer planets, strange phenomena began to occur. Clocks drifted. Instruments failed. Crew members reported hearing voices, not through comms, but inside their thoughts. Lisa was the first to recognize it. It's the same frequency as the architects, she said, but distorted. Like an echo. Jake asked what she meant. She hesitated before answering. What if the Harari aren't enemies of the architects, but their creators? On the 9th day, contact was made. The Harari structure filled the forward view, an impossible lattice of broken geometry, shimmering with energy that seemed half alive, half decayed. No two sensors agreed on what it was made of. Then, just as with the architects, a voice entered their minds. But this time, it wasn't calm. It wasn't unified. It was fractured, millions of overlapping tones, like countless consciousnesses speaking as one. We remember the architects. They defied the cycle. Now, you carry their mark. Jake struggled to form thoughts. Who are you? What cycle? The silence between civilizations. Lisa gasped. They're not here to communicate. They're here to reset. The voice grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the ship. Every mind that rises must fall. The architects refused. They sought to preserve what must end. Jake's vision blurred. He saw flashes. The rise and collapse of countless worlds, endless civilizations consumed by darkness and reborn. The Harari weren't conquerors. They were custodians of entropy, enforcers of cosmic balance. Life is permitted. Continuity is not. And then, silence. When Jake awoke, he was back on Earth. The Guardian had been found drifting near Saturn, engines offline, its crew unconscious but alive. No one could explain how they'd returned. The Harari structure had vanished without a trace. But the orbital ring, the architect's watchers, had reignited. Their light pulsed in synchronized rhythm, like a heartbeat. Lisa analyzed the pulses and realized they formed a repeating pattern. A countdown. Governments panicked once again. Was it the architects? The Harari? A warning of extinction? Jake thought differently. He believed it wasn't a countdown to destruction, but to decision. Humanity's test was reaching its final stage, not of power, but of purpose. Would they stand as a civilization defined by fear? Or rise as one defined by understanding? Because the Harari had made one thing clear, the universe doesn't care who survives. It only cares who remembers. As months passed, the countdown continued, its light visible from every continent. People began calling it the clock of heaven. Children painted it in schools. Pilots saluted it during takeoff. Philosophers debated whether it marked an ending or a beginning. Jake knew better. He remembered what the architects had told him. Do not look to the stars for gods. They look to you. And now, as the light in the sky pulsed faster each night, he finally understood what they meant. The architects weren't saviors. The Harari weren't destroyers. They were both reflections, mirrors held up to every civilization that dared to awaken. The real test was never about survival. It was about meaning.